voice of growth, mastering the mind and market. Welcome to the Voice of Growth podcast, Mastering the Mind and Market. My name is Manny Teran, and I'm your host. It has been said that sales is the lifeblood of business. And while this is partially true, it doesn't go far enough. You can think about the brain as leadership, setting the vision of the company, setting direction, planning, all of that. You can think about the heart as the value of the company being pumped out with the lifeblood. You can think about the nervous system like operations, sending signals, getting signals, making things happen. You can think about the employees like your hands, blah, 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 blah. I can use tons of analogies regarding sales, and I'm using this simplistic, sort of silly example to illustrate the fact that sales is oftentimes misunderstood. There's a lot of baggage surrounding sales and salesmanship, all those aspects. If you really think about it and you agree with 85% of all Americans in that there's this sentiment that salespeople are not liked, that the greasy used car salesman, the door-to-door person, you think about all these aspects of sales, and there's this very heavy negative connotation, of which I even had that before into going into sales. So I was a mechanical engineer, graduated from the university, went to work for an aerospace company, and after about a year and change, I went to a seminar of this software product called LabVIEW, sat in the back. I happened to have known and learned LabVIEW, and the guy up front was presenting, and I was just answering questions. I was just in the back, just being vocal for some reason. At the time, I was kind of quiet, so it was sort of outside of my typical domain. Afterwards, he called me down, and I thought, "Oh crap, I'm in trouble." Called me down, and he said, "Hey, listen, we're looking for somebody in this area to be a salesperson. Would you be interested?" And I thought to myself, "What are you talking about? I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm a degreed engineer. What am I doing in sales?" He goes, "Meet me at O'Malley's at 7." So I met him at O'Malley's at 7 o'clock. We had dinner, and he opened up the keys to the kingdom, and he showed me this new world that I didn't even know existed. And that for me was the beginning of an entire career in sales marketing, and eventually would lead me to be running companies. And it's been a one hell of a ride. That in one way was my butterfly effect that has really propagated to this career. And so I mention this because there's a beauty to this career. There is science and there's art to sales. You can be a very excellent salesperson, classically trained and all that, or you can just come off the street, have street smarts with no training whatsoever, and you guys can both be equally as successful. There's a lot of elements of logic, but there's a lot of emotion wrapped into sales. A lot of emotion. I'm not going to talk about the emotional side. I'm not talking about the nuts and bolts today, although I will mention towards the end of the podcast a framework that I developed over my 2 decades being in sales. But for right now, I'm going to talk about there's three things that are really involved with the sales process. And before I go there, let's talk about what does it take to grow your business? You grow your business by selling more of what people want to buy. How do you know what people want to buy? You follow, understand, and use trends. So that statement is something we developed at Spark Partners a while ago. I still use it. It was part of the process that Adam and I kind of put in place. And I was more on the sales side, so I've always sort of gravitated towards that. Gets me super excited as well, by the way, if you can't tell. And so the idea is that you really, step one is you need to fully, deeply understand your customers. What is it that they need? What is the underserved, unmet need? What problem are you solving? This is the truth discovery process and is oftentimes has some elements of marketing and product development in the mix as well. You want to understand what's happening really front end. And you do so by understanding not only their immediate needs, but where are their needs going to change? This is where trends come into play. And I'm not talking about fashion trends. I'm talking about big, giant mega trends like AI, the gig economy, the environment, demographics. There's tons of these at play that if you really understand them, will take your career to a different level. Now, I can do a lot of conversations and talk around trends, and we'll likely have a webinar here in the future regarding this, so stay tuned. But for right now, just understand that there is some amount of looking forward in the future when it comes to trends, and it's not nothing that you should be afraid of. It actually has a lot of power in it because if you can get in front of these trends and skate where the puck is going to be, then you'll make that sale and you'll be riding the crest of the wave rather than on the backside. This is what you want. Of course, it like anything else, the market's ever shifting, things are always changing, and you need to stay abreast of these things. Different conversation for different podcasts. For today, think about step 1 is truly deeply understanding your customer. Step 2 is to create and communicate your value. This is a good time to talk about value and value delivery, two different aspects. Oftentimes, they're really thought of almost like the same. So, there's lots of definitions of value. One that I'll say right now is there is an exchange of services and goods such that the customer sees a perceived or an actual change in their condition. So they are actually able to enjoy life better, work faster, XYZ. So you can think about there's 100 different ways to define value. Value is not what you're selling. Value is not the widget. Value isn't necessarily the widget, although it can be in very rare occasions. But value delivery, that's the widget. That's how you actually take the widget and give it to the customer. Let me give you an example that's a classic example that I've used for a long time. You think about Netflix. Netflix started off early on with the value of we deliver entertainment. Early on, their value delivery was they delivered DVDs in the mail. You'd go to this archaic website, you'd pick what you want, and then 4 or 5 days later, DVDs showed up in the mail. You took them, you watched them, you could lose them for a month, nobody cared. And then when you're done, you put them back in this prepaid envelope, you send them back. That was their initial value delivery. Time went on, they closed down some of their warehouses. They invested instead in this concept of streaming. It was kind of unheard of early on. And they started streaming movies on the internet, online. Value, we deliver entertainment. Value delivery, we do so through streaming. Time evolved even more so as the market shifted because other people began also streaming. So they had to stay in front of the curve on that crest of that wave. They then created and became the largest movie studio in the world. I believe that they still actually are. Value, we deliver entertainment. Value delivery, we do so through our awesome movie studio. We do custom content. And so they're evolving with the market conditions, but their value remains the same. When you think about value by delivery, think about Netflix. There's lots of other examples. There's also examples of ones that missed the mark where their value didn't stay abreast of the market, where they didn't follow trends, where they actually decided to defend and extend. My former partners, Adam Hartung, wrote a brilliant book where it talks about the idea of extend and defend basically your value. And so Sears, Toys R Us, Kodak, Kmart. I can go on and on and on. There's a whole cemetery full of dead or almost dying companies because they didn't follow trends. They didn't understand what was happening in the world. And essentially, the market shifted when they did not. So, step 1, understand the customer. Step 2, create and communicate the value. By the way, communicate, that's the marketing people, which is an integral part of the whole framework. Branding, I mean, I can go on and on, but this is a simplistic example. And then the last part is ask for the decision, which I'm lumping into the actual sales process of quoting and showing up with the customer, asking questions, but you gotta ask the question. You've got to have the moment where you say, "Here, I've produced for you our value. Here it is. This is how we're going to deliver it to you. Here's our value delivery. Now, I need you to commit and say you're going to buy." And believe it or not, a lot of people in sales and those even that are not in sales have a hard time with that particular statement of asking for the sale. Asking for the sale for me has become second nature. And I realize that sales is a numbers game. And I'm not talking about necessarily how much money you bring in the door, although that's a part of it. I'm talking about your funnel. If I am working with somebody who is a prospect and we begin to uncover over time that it is not necessarily a good fit, I will be the first to say, I understand that this is not a good time based on what I've learned about your situation. Why don't we revisit this in 6 months and I'll come back? Make a quick note on my phone. Done. Numbers, execution. You got to come in, bring people in through the door, find out if they're what they need, their unmet need is something you can actually deal with. And if so, you deal with it. And if not, then you walk away. Oftentimes, I see people struggling with that piece. People also struggle with the second part I talked about with creating and communicating your value. Sometimes you have seconds to communicate your value. You're at a trade show or you're at an expo or whatever. You're at some street fair and you got people walking down the road and you see that they are thirsty and you've got this new delicious drink of some sort. You have a split second to identify something that they're struggling with. Maybe they're thirsty and you've got a quick second to come in and swoop in and deliver your value statement. The problem is that people are so used to getting bombarded with information that you've got to break through and you have to find ways to do so. There are so many things that I could talk about at this moment regarding this. Matter of fact, a webinar we'll be having in the future will really go deep into the sales aspect. Is something that I'm very passionate about because I see this as a bit of a pioneering effort in a lot of people that are not salespeople. um, I'm I'd like to do kind of two halves of this webinar. One is for salespeople, and one is for not salespeople. And let me actually rewind a bit to when you were born, because guess what? You were born a salesman or saleswoman. Why do I say that? Because upon birth, you closed your first sale. You went out and you began crying, and your mother or whomever provided you with sustenance to the effect that you're now a grown adult, and here you are. This is something that Zig Ziglar talked about. Very old school, former Baptist preacher guy who became a sales megastar. And just search for Zig Ziglar. Has lots of really cool things to share. And one of those is the idea that when you sell something to someone that really needs it, it's more about a satiation of not only their needs but yours, because you get pumped up when you sell something that somebody actually needs. It's a beautiful thing. I'll use this example. It's kind of a woke example that is one of the reasons why there's a negative connotation to sales is the idea of, oh, Bob can sell ice to an Eskimo. Well, the idea is that Bob is so good that he can sell something to somebody who doesn't really need it. That's not good salesmanship. You sell ice to the Saudis because they have the money and they need it. They want that indoor skiing thing. You sell them the ice. So that's really the understanding of what sales is all about. I love sales. I think that there's a lot to it, and there's aspects of all elements of life. There is a lot of psychology involved. There's personal relationships involved. There's negotiation skills. There's ethical influence. There's lots of aspects, and I can't wait to do this webinar because it's going to be really a deep understanding of a lot of my experience. But I'm going to bring in some other folks that have maybe a different angle to bring to the conversation. So I have this, Profectory is the name of the company. Profectory is drawn from a Latin word mean perfectus, which means to depart, to succeed, almost like a journey. And so, as I began to coalesce some of my 20 years of sales leadership and rank and file and all aspects of sales, I began to really put together an understanding of these elements of sales, and I was able to map it to the word profect. Because profect in profectory is a very similar thing where it's a journey. And so the first thing you do in that profect system is you prepare. So in that preparation part, there's not only the idea of you preparing your materials, but understanding who that customer is. What is that pre-qualification that makes you the ideal person to come in and solve their problems? If it looks like it's not gonna work at that early stage, don't waste your time, go somewhere else. And that first piece is oftentimes just kind of pushed aside because we wanna get to the exciting stuff of, quote, "selling," but it doesn't make sense to burn your time, your energy, your resources on someone who's not ready to buy. Number 2 is reveal. This is where you understand what really is broken. You go deep. So now you've actually walked through the door of the customer. You begin to understand that controlled discovery to see what is it that's really broken. You need to reveal to yourself, to them as well, what the problem is. This can be done immediately. This can be done over several sessions. Ultimately, it's something that is second nature to some of us that have been in the industry for a while. You early on need to identify what that thing is. And sometimes it becomes an aspect of putting it out there. Is this what you need? And they say, not really. Then you can spend the time to go through and understanding what that actually is. So the next step is to orient. This is where you want to understand who are they becoming? Because believe it or not, sales is very much about identity. I've talked about that a lot. Identity is so crucial. And so you need to look at who they are as a human being and see where they are going towards becoming. So they are a middle manager. They want to get a promotion because they want a bigger house because their wife has another baby on the way. Whatever. These are all aspects that are part of the idea of orienting them to a position where they are going to become, and you're there to support that. That's that missing piece. Where they're going to go is great, but how are you going to help them to get there? The next one is to frame. This is where you step in and say, why me? You're going to frame it up. You're going to basically create the environment so your product or service is the inevitable solution to their problems. You come in and you lay things out, and it's just the next logical step. Now, brand equity is a term that's used where you kind of come in with a lot of that already, but you can come in with no brand equity whatsoever. You can come in from the street. It'll be more difficult. There's an old saying of nobody ever got fired for buying Big Blue, which was IBM. We have a very exciting guest coming next week that will kind of put some interesting spin on that. More about that later. And so the next one is evolve. Within the evolution step, this is where you resolve any resistance. This is where you take your value and their needs and you begin to massage it. This is where you begin to negotiate without concession. There is lots of negotiation people I study, and Chris Voss is a wonderful, very brilliant man who I think you should definitely look into if you haven't already. Has a great book called Never Split the Difference, has the Black Swan Group. A lot of powerful aspects to what he does are really shown crystal clear in sales. There's another guy, Chase Hughes, who also has lots of information. You can go down this entire rabbit hole like I do all the time and just collect information and do a lot of research. So after the evolution, you want to get to that commit stage. Decide, guide the buyer to make that confident decision. You want to really close as leadership, as partnership, not as pressure. When you asking someone to commit under pressure, it will leave a an almost like a marker be sort of beneath the surface that will linger and will never or very be it'd be very difficult to get out of the way of. Let me give you an example. I once worked alongside a guy who was, a great sales guy, seemingly from what everybody said. He was loud, he was gregarious, he would take people out on these fancy dinners, he had the fancy car, all these things. And what really became evident to me early on in my sales career is that the guy was all show. And what really got me to think about it as the direction I did not want to take was this idea of pressure. He would get the person to the point where, I mean, it was almost like a in the moment, sleeves rolled up, sweating, you gotta make a decision now. These kind of situations when you go to, like, a car dealership and they're pressing at the very last minute, "Let me go talk to my manager." There's all these tactics that are used that have been used for decades. But what I really, I'm sharing with you now is that those tactics will get you or may get you that immediate win, but they won't get you the long-term customer. I have bought many cars in my day. I cannot remember one salesperson. I never went back to the same salesperson to buy another car. And why not? Because that high pressure salesperson just got to me in the wrong way. I do have salespeople, however, and I am loyal if someone is able to fully understand what my needs are, take the time to really look at where am I going in my career or whatever it is, and then basically sell me only what I need. Maybe if I see there's a growth path, maybe they'll take it that next step or 2. That's it. Then when I need it, something else the next time, I'm going right back to that salesperson. A lot of power in that. And then the last part of the Pro-Effect sales system is transition. Transition is where you lock the trust and you convert that sale into a post-sale conversation. This is where the partnership comes in. This is where the check-in comes in after 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. And this is where the idea is, how are things going with what I sold you? What is there something else I can help you with? Hope you're doing well. And so there's a lot of this idea that chit chat is bad or people don't like to do that, talk about the weather and all that. All you're doing is lowering the bridge. That's all you're doing. You don't have to talk about the weather if you don't want to. There's other ways to lower the bridge. One of those is to be vulnerable yourself and to show up as yourself and say, "Listen, this is what I've got going on, and how are things with you?" So you're just building rapport because that smooths things out. We want to buy things from people we like. I just mentioned that a second ago. If you have a rigid conversation with somebody and it becomes very transactional, then you might make the sale, but you're not gonna win that lifelong customer. So to wrap up the podcast here, lots of elements of sales, lots of psychology, lots of art form, elements, lot of logical elements as well. And it's something that there's so much beauty in sales that if you're a new salesperson or if you're early in your career, you're getting that idea of how wonderful it can be. I've had mega deals close. I had a flight to Germany to close this massive deal, and it was a month. It was a 6 month process, and it was it was an 8 figure process, and it was like boom. So those are just amazing. And there's other times when you work on something so hard and your team is engaged and all this, and at the last minute, it gets canceled. I've had so many of those that when I have even anything remotely close, it doesn't bother me. Doesn't mean that I'm not a feeling person. It just means that I realize that it's a misalignment in what I was able to provide and what they needed. And if you think about the idea of budget, which is always the conversation of, do they have budget? If so, what is it? Is aligned for what we are providing? All those things. Budget is also an element of solving their pain. If their pain is large enough, big enough, and painful enough, the budget will be there. So if it doesn't work out and it goes to a competitor who is less expensive than you, then that means that their pain wasn't big enough. And so as you start to evolve your own career in sales, and even for those that are not in sales, think about how to take the value that you're providing and really make sure that it is not only explained in a way that they understand, but also aligned with emerging trends. Once you understand that, your company, your career, and even your internal identity will be forever changed. Thanks for listening. Cheers.